a huge priority to make sure that I actually have a pulse, or I have people that are going to have a pulse on what's actually happening within your team. Because otherwise, it's one of these lagging indicators where people either voting with their feet and leaving the company, or you have pockets of disconnect or silos within your organizations that you should have got rooted out probably 6 months ago.
You're listening to Brainwork Framework, a business and marketing podcast brought to you by focus-biz.com.
With us today is Kim Nakamaru. She's the general counsel, but oversees many functions of Relativity Space. Relativity Space is a rapidly scaling rocket company and leader in large-scale additive 3D printing, manufacturing on a trajectory to become a commercial space launch company and U.S. government partner for critical R&D and innovation, featuring over 1,200 plus employees. Kim, so excited to have you on. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. You nailed that company description.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate it. So excited to have you on. Tell us more about your background and experience and how that kind of brought you into what you're doing today at Relativity Space.
Yeah, I'm a lawyer by trade, and I'm still a lawyer, a happy one. And I came to rocketry in a nonlinear way. I think any person, any executive will say that they zigzagged through and never foresaw where they might have ended up. But I've always had a passion for whether that's building from an athletic perspective, building your academic career, or building businesses. So when I came out of law school, or even when I was thinking about law school, I wasn't thinking about this of wanting to be Law and Order on TV, though I did do a stint with a federal judge, which was very much somewhat like that. I really believe that every piece along your way builds to where you're getting. And so starting with that particular judge, he wasn't a typical litigator who did trials. He was actually a mergers and acquisitions lawyer and a general counsel by trade, which I think he might have been the only judge on the federal bench who had a background quite like that. And he did things his own way. So I would credit his name's Judge Spencer Letts, with really kind of teaching me that things don't have to be traditional. You don't have to go to X or Y school and then go down this path in order to forge the career that you want and that suits your soul. And so here, similar to him, I went into an M&A practice at a large law firm right away. And notwithstanding it being a large law firm, I aligned with a partner there who enabled me to have a large remit. So yes, we did mergers and acquisitions, in large part in the sports and entertainment space, but also the telecommunications space. But because I have an entrepreneurial spirit, part of my pro bono practice, meaning when you're providing free legal services, one of the things I did was provide outside general counsel to early stage tech companies who didn't have legal services. And so that was my first taste into what a general counsel might do, and working with founders and entrepreneurs who are going to throw whatever it is that they have in front of you. So that's where I said, oh, Judge Letts, I can see why that type of role would be interesting. So when the opportunity presented itself 4 or 5 years into my tenure at the law firm to go into a company, that's when I took my first step into a broad-based director of corporate role at a company called Global Eagle Entertainment, which is a public company here in LA, to learn all aspects of a global business. And so then almost 5 years, I became the general counsel there, eventually served as general counsel for a couple of years. That was an aviation and media and content business. And even though I went there because it scratched the sports and entertainment itch, it had a huge satellite connectivity business, international aviation and maritime business, and some government work too. Then the next role that came along, I was recruited to a tech company called Eagleview Technologies, based in Seattle. That company was a geospatial technology company where they put, what do you call these different high-res cameras on small aircraft, and we owned the aircraft business. So it started to be where some of my current scope includes safety, and I was on the aviation safety board there. Suddenly I'm going to hangars and dealing with mechanics and technicians, and I never saw that coming. But then equally having a highly innovative software as a service aspect of that business, huge IP function that I got to build there, and just a really high-performing legal team. So from there, was recruited to my current company. Relativity Space is a startup. It's my first startup. So my trajectory was public company general counsel, so with some aviation adjacency, to a private equity-backed company, this Eagleview technology company, to now a venture-backed startup. So 3 very different spaces. I think what was perhaps attractive about my candidacy to the current company was that I've been in highly regulated spaces before. I scaled teams, helped businesses scale, and Relativity is at a position now, and we can get into exactly where we are right now, but we're a late stage startup who's on a trajectory to scale, both in terms of employees and in terms of business size and market value. So we're right at this hockey stick moment. That is a really exciting thing. In addition, it's rockets. We actually build rockets.
One of the two coolest subjects that literally every child chooses one or the other. It's either dinosaurs or it's space.
Exactly.
Rockets, that's the coolest thing.
No, and I have 3 boys. They're all under the age of 7. And it's much easier to explain that mommy does build rockets as opposed to saying mommy is in a SaaS business, or when you're on an airplane and you're looking at movies, mommy does that. I mean, I guess that's kind of tangible, but quite literally, we're in a 1,000,000 square foot rocket factory in Long Beach, right next to the Long Beach airport. We have huge pieces of rocket hardware on the floor now, which is different than a year ago or a year and a half ago when I joined. I traveled to our NASA Stennis, Mississippi site, which is where we test our engines and big fire trenches, test stands. There are multiple stories. You're on the bayou there. We'll be shipping our rocket or part of the rocket through the Panama Canal to get there. Then it'll get back on a ship from the bayou there and get over to our launch site in Cape Canaveral. At Cape Canaveral, we're building our pad from scratch. You can't just use a pad for any old rocket. You fit the pad to the specs of what you are building. So though we've successfully launched a 3D printed rocket to space a couple of years ago, the new rocket we're building, which is called the Terran-R, is a much larger rocket. It's made specifically for this low Earth orbit satellite telecommunication type of customer. It's a beast. So the launch pad similarly is a beast. And my scope includes oversight of the environmental health and safety team, which has responsibility for the health and safety of the whole enterprise, in addition to just some whip smart environmental guys there who are making sure that when we launch the rocket, we are not harming things in the water and having to run simulations basically for things that have not been done before and having to prove to the government why they should give us a launch license for the directions that we want to launch our rocket. So it's a very engaging job.
Yeah, a lot of regulations and pieces just to consider. I mean, just first to be in the type of work that you're doing and to credit you for your entrepreneurial spirit, because it's so true that many of us, we don't really know where we're going to end up, but we're willing to take new opportunities. If a door is going to open itself and we're willing to learn and apply ourselves, we can do these new jobs that are similar yet very different and grow our experience. And I think you're a great example of that. Just, hey, can I take these past skills and apply it to something new and continue learning?
Yes. And I truly believe that great leadership transcends functions and companies. Yeah, when I first joined the company, see, our company is by and large, these are actual rocket engineers. And many of them have progressed quickly into their leadership roles. And I remember when I was hired just as the general counsel to do legal, within the first few weeks of my tenure came the opportunity to take on a few other functions. And the other one was being employee relations, which was formerly part of the human resources department. And I remember visiting the Stennis, Mississippi site, and a couple of our famous rocket scientists there who are high VP pluses in the company asked, like, what makes you think that you as a lawyer could run these other companies that are not in your scope? And I said, look, you don't have to be the subject matter expert to be an excellent leader. And I've seen that. And you don't have to be necessarily the best of that thing to be a great leader either. It's like, I've been the captain of the sports teams from the time I was small until I was through the end of college. And sure, it was because I was a great athlete in whatever sport that was. But you got to learn how to also lead when the chips are against you, or when you get kicked out of whatever boat I was in college, and you still are having to be the leader and being able to show teams what that looks like and how to succeed and define success differently and lead people of all different types. And also putting the right people against the right problems, right? I think that doesn't matter what function you're at. Like, your job as a leader is to empower your teams to do great work and help guide them to that North Star that you're getting towards. And for us, it's getting to our first launch as quickly as we can of this Terran-R rocket.
Very cool. And I think a lot of business owners and leaders out there kind of struggle with building the right team and motivating them in the right way. Sometimes they fall into the trap of either trying to micromanage too much or they're just so hands off that they don't know what's happening in the day to day. That's what I loved about a lot of the topics that you wanted to cover is just leadership. How do we become better leaders? How does this kind of influence our team, our clients, and our company as a whole? What does it take to be this good leader? You said it's great just to be able to lead, but you don't have to be a subject matter expert. What are some of the qualities of leaders, and what do you think people are doing wrong right now in terms of leadership?
Yeah, I think good leadership starts with understanding the chess pieces you have on the table. And whether it is that you're coming in fresh to a new company, as I've done a couple of times, to a team that didn't know what to expect from their new general counsel, or whether you're building a team outside of your domain expertise, you have to start fundamentally with understanding your leaders and their teams, because you shouldn't just stop at your direct reports. You often get the real from the people who are actually doing the work. So I make it quite a huge priority to make sure that I actually have a pulse, or I have people that are going to have a pulse on what's actually happening within your team. Because otherwise, it's one of these lagging indicators where people are either voting with their feet and leaving the company, or you have pockets of disconnect or silos within your organizations that you should have got rooted out probably 6 months ago.
Right. And those are difficult decisions to make. It's like, did we hire the right person? Should I cut it off now or wait to see if they grow? And can we mold them into something better? It's a challenge. Maybe it's not the right fit for an employee. How do leaders focus now in 2025? I feel like the demand in the labor market has shifted. I feel like the labor workforce has a bit more negotiating and bargaining powers. Maybe they're looking for flexible options or work from home options. So it seems like leaders need to motivate and inspire them in different ways. Are you seeing changes or shifts in the way leaders are kind of inspiring their team or even hiring and firing?
Yeah, I think so. It's an interesting time. I think back in the fall of this past year, everyone was kind of waiting to see what was going to happen with the election. And then we'll wait till the inauguration. We'll wait till after year end, and then we're going to see what we're doing with hiring. And I think it is strange right now, the hiring market, because on one hand, we're seeing not that much hiring, but on the other hand, we're not sure why. And it could be people who are in okay jobs or just kind of standing by because there's a concern out there where, gosh, if I leave, so much instability in the markets, both the financial markets, but then also I think the labor markets. I don't know if people are willing to take that extra step out and go to somewhere where maybe things either won't be better or there'll be a series of layoffs that are making the rounds around the industry. I mean, obviously in the federal government, a lot of our customers are government research and development. So for us, we're having an interesting dynamic there, and we have a lot of interest because of that. So I do think that employers, as far as what they're offering, I think that's one topic, but I think what you can do when you're on the inside, and this is more about retention, is people at the end of the day, you got to know what motivates people. Like some people are indeed motivated by the financial package, but a lot of people are motivated. And I would say I'm one of these people that wants to be on a winning team, not only a winning team, whatever your functional team is, but a winning business. And right now, Relativity just this week announced the change of our CEO to the CEO of Google, Eric Schmidt, who talk about a winner. I really look forward to what that means for us as an executive team. And our founder, Tim Ellis, is still going to be with the company in his board capacity. And truth be told, he was a huge reason I wanted to join this company, because I have a heart for founders. I love seeing the twists and turns of a business and working with founders and CEOs, helping them guide through uncertainty or how to best. If there's a crack to go through, I'm going to go find that crack for that guy. So that's been a lot of the journey with Tim, and he is just an inspirational human being who started the company on the back of a napkin. Sounds stereotypical, but it's true. And he thought that humanity depended on being able to large scale 3D print and also enables life in an interplanetary way, potentially. And so sounds like a boy's pipe dream has turned into reality. And I'm excited to see what Eric Schmidt brings to us from like an operational rigor. He's obviously quite well known for the success he brought to Google. He took over right when Google was taking over from their founders. So here you almost see history repeating itself, hopefully 15 years later from his tenure. 2011 is when he left Google, and this is his first CEO role since then. So to say that we're
Wow.
thrilled by that is an understatement. And what that means for our ability to attract and retain the best and the brightest and the smartest to come to a place where we really think our culture is different too. So to your point of what you're doing for employees, we really think we could win without having to be a psychotic, cutthroat place. But make no mistake, we are very hardcore. We have expectations. You can't try to launch a rocket in a year and a half from now by sitting on your laurels.
Definitely need some action. First, congratulations on acquiring the new CEO. Hopefully he can bring in a lot of the technology and just advancements he brought Google in the early stage of the startup and the growth phase that Google saw early on in those years. But something that you kind of mentioned just right now is a lot of businesses and people were waiting till after the election and then waiting till after the inauguration. Just that fear and uncertainty that's happening both in the markets and business and international trade space right now. But leaders kind of need to remain strong and steadfast during these times. Should they be showing emotions? How do they kind of manage the feelings with reality versus the decision making with all the uncertainty going on? How do they kind of like stay on the path?
I think there's ways to support your culture that you've built at your business in a way that doesn't use catchphrases that people have an allergic reaction to. Because, for example, one of our core values at Relativity is humanity. And I think that transcends who's in office. Support our employees, whoever they are and however they show up every day. And we really believe that that's a strength of ours. So you don't have to use these catchphrase terms to describe that. And we believe our culture is indeed reflective of our belief in everyone's humanity. So I do agree, though, it is a hard time for businesses. I think this is probably one of the top topics for any executive team is how do we deal with the executive orders? What are we going to say? And especially for a business that like ours, where we have government customers, this is a very volatile subject within any business, and certainly one where we clearly are going to comply with the law and regulations. And I think employees are smart enough to understand that two things could be true. That on one hand, you will comply with the law. You might not agree with it, but we're not going to violate the law. But you can also equally support your employees. And those two things don't have to be in conflict.
Yes, I totally agree. And one thing I wanted to ask, because as you were talking about 3D printing rockets and shipping them across the ocean, a lot of ideas came to mind. So when I think of 3D printing, I'm thinking of that tabletop system, right? And it's got little thread and it's moving. Is doing this for rockets at a much bigger scale? Is this a Cape Canaveral style, like 3D printer that's just humming around and building? Or is it kind of built on a smaller scale and pieced together?
No, Tim invented the large scale 3D printing that we became famous for. And this is called wire arc additive manufacturing, or WAM. So if you imagine, my son has this thing called Toy Box, which is plastic and it makes the little toy, and they're probably the size of your hand at the biggest. But this is like 18. This thing takes up, our ceilings are 100 feet high. We can print things like 18 feet across. So imagine it turns sideways. So instead of something additively coming up, it's facing out. So if you're thinking about the barrel of a rocket, it comes out from the build plate with metal wires. And then there's the proprietary technology. These arms come and fuse them together.
Oh, so cool.
Yes, yeah, that's really cool. And there's another method called powder bed fusion technology, which has been around. And we use a lot of that in our engines. And that's more of a kind of a spray. And you can imagine how cool that is, especially if you come from a manufacturing background. My husband was one of the big primes. And part of his scope was overseeing manufacturing. And if you're having an individual look at every single one of these parts, and imagine if you just had one, the amount of time that takes out of the integration and the tests of that particular part is something that we really believe is going to be and is a game changer in the industry.
Yeah. And it seems like it presents just a new set of challenges. Like you said, that quality control piece where it was each individual piece. Now it's just there in one. So it's like the challenges change. They just shift and pivot a little bit, but you're just adapting to how the technology changes and what its needs will be.
Yeah. And it doesn't take too much of a stretch of imagination to think about how the government might use some of this technology. I mean, that's some of the things I can't talk about expressly, but the government is itching, right, to get to it with our business development teams across our site. We might be able to support for them in various of the 3-letter agencies.
Right, absolutely. Something to consider is if you're not sure what pieces to put together here, just consider where the most money comes from for and with the government. And we know a lot of the funding that comes through for both nonprofits and those who rely heavier on government contracts, just that uncertainty going forward. But I think there's a benefit to having some backing from the government through the support, through contracts. It just allows you to advance and kind of know, okay, we can rely on this money to come through and we can set this aside for research and development or try this new technology. So it just
Right.
kind of changes things for you.
Yeah. And though we have really two businesses in that sense, we really believe that our additive, our 3D printing business enables our rocket business. Our first rocket was 3D printed. We did a lot of R&D on that. A lot of it is ending up on the current rocket. So you can see how that's a Venn diagram. But then also it's a standalone business as well when you think about all the government use cases there might be. So I think that's also the shift. When you think about these founder-led companies that sometimes it started as a science project, but then you start thinking about, gosh, that's nice. We proved that a technology works. And is this viable in the market? And so that over the last few years has been a huge focus. We need to make this thing have product market fit, just like any business, just like any of the three businesses I've been a part of or any clients I've served. At the end of the day, we're here to have a profitable business. So we're not just thinking about making one rocket and making sure it gets to its first flight at the end of 2026. We're thinking around the corner about scaling that to how many launches we're going to be able 10, 20, 30 rockets per year. And by the way, we're making a reusable rocket. So when you think about the economies of scale there and the amount of money and profit that will enable, that's what we're going for.
Oh, very exciting. Now, you shared a lot of use cases for government uses. Would this be available to the general public or available to businesses and commercial manufacturing applications
Yeah,
in
I
the
think
future?
we take a lot of pride in the intellectual property, both from a patent and trade secret side of the house. And we have a fabulous industry leading head of intellectual property and her team work closely with the business to make sure that we are developing those competitive moats around the different aspects of our technology. Because though, yes, like right now we are laser focused on building the rocket and getting rocket to the launch pad as fast as humanly possible, we are thinking about what other revenue streams are there. Are we protected? Are we ensuring our freedom to operate from an intellectual property perspective? That's forefront in our minds. And I think that any legal professional and a lot of people who, like a lot of these engineers, are quite familiar with those types of principles. And that's really embedded in like who we are culturally in terms of how we think about our engineering principles and how we think about the protection of our intellectual property.
It's something to be mindful of as you kind of grow and scale and try different things because you don't want to enable your competitors to just replicate what you've been doing. If they buy a 3D printer from one side and then replicate what you're doing, it would be very difficult to really do it right.
Yeah, no, that's right. We take the intellectual property of others extremely seriously. Like that is a cultural thing that we're really proud of here. And that goes for former employers of our employees, but also as we work with a myriad of vendors. We make sure that we set up the right protocols to make sure that people understand where the lines are and how to conduct themselves. So that is something that I think all businesses should be thinking about, especially as they start to scale. I think early stage companies often don't have a legal department, sometimes don't have business people who are thinking about that aspect around the corner, but no quicker way to stop progress than for people to flub that and to not have the right protections in place when competition comes around or when you're working with vendors and that vendor is upset and all of a sudden they think that you're using their IP.
Right. Absolutely. Kim, I wanted to ask, where can people find out more about you or get connected with you or your company online?
Yeah, so I'm on LinkedIn. I have a public profile, Kim Nakamaru. You look that up, Relativity Space. Relativity is a fabulous brand and communications department. And you can find us on Instagram. You can find us on X. We're on LinkedIn, certainly. And you can read more also about this week on Monday when we announced our CEO transition. We also launched our 2025 Terranar product update. We've been, heads down, laser focused on building the business for the last year. And we haven't been active as much showing the progress of the rocket. But this is the first time in about a year where we put out, I think it's 45 minutes long, and you don't have to be a rocket scientist to really appreciate how cool and how much progress has been made in just a year.
Very exciting. I love that. So excited to check that out. And we'll have all those links available down in the show notes and the description for everyone to check out. Kim, any last parting advice you would share either with your younger self or maybe other leaders or business owners, entrepreneurs out there who are either just started or they're struggling, spinning their wheels right now? Is there any advice that you would give to them?
I would say if it feels scary, that's probably the right move. Throughout my career, even during college, even before, sports, any business, anything, school, when something you feel slightly over your skis or you think that move is something uphill too far, it's probably the right move. I think that's the way you stay hungry, you stay thirsty, and you're never sitting back. Because I believe in what Relativity is building here and the culture of winning. And I think that's been central to who I've been from the beginning. And I think you don't win without taking considerable risk. That's why I think being a founder and entrepreneur is such an incredible thing to have just in your core, because that applies regardless of if you're actually building a business or whether you're just conducting your daily life.
Absolutely. I totally agree. Some great advice here. Definitely need to take action. If it's scary, it's probably something that's going to move you outside your comfort zone, which means you're growing and expanding, something that we should always look forward to doing. Kim, we appreciate you sharing your tips and tricks, everything that's going on with Relativity and everything you have going on. Very exciting. So looking forward to the progress as well.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Of course. Thank you.